Well, welcome all. We are thrilled to have you here for the Literature of Later Life, a conversation with a wonderful instructor in our writer studio at the Graham School, Stephanie Friedman. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Seth Green. I'm the dean here at the Graham School at the University of Chicago. And let me welcome you to our gorgeous campus, which we are showing as what it will be in just a few months here as we look forward to a wonderful winter season. And that is because it is time where you can not only register for autumn, but you can also now register for all of your winter classes on our website. For those who want to continue learning with us through events, I'll just mention that we have at least three coming up that may interest you. We have a conversation with the president of the MacArthur Foundation, who's also a gifted scholar and author of a new book, Wired Wisdom, How to Age Better Online. We have an information session on our upcoming Study in Rome opportunity, and we have a book discussion with scholar Roy Scanton from Notre Dame on his book Impasse, which looks at climate change and the limits of progress from a philosophical perspective. And you can see here our winter course registration is now open, and I'm going to take down my screen because you are here today because we are having a conversation with Stephanie about her upcoming course, and we're going to be previewing some of the material. And so let me start, Stephanie, with what might be the most obvious question, which is why this course? What motivated you to put together an offering on the literature of later life?
Sure. So first of all, Seth, I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to teach this course and also to talk about it today. I really appreciate that. Um, as I always tell my Graham School students, when I propose a Graham School course, it's uh, the first thing I always think to myself is what kind of conversations do I want to have? So what kind of conversations do I want to have with some smart, thoughtful people in the classroom? And so in this particular case, um, I had been doing some reading on my own and some thinking on my own about you know, we know that there's a type of novel called the Bildungsroman, right? It's just stories about someone growing up and coming into adulthood and coming into their own. But what about after that? What happens after that? Novels or stories or poems that are not simply about looking back with nostalgia, but are about grappling with the very real ongoing issues in life that we all continue to have once we are, past our 20s and 30s and so on. Um, and it just so happened that a colleague of yours at the Graham School, J.M. Conway, and I were in a in a leadership program together, and she mentioned the wonderful initiative that the Graham School has now to talk about these kinds of issues. What's your next act? The leadership programs and so on that you have. And there was that wonderful session with Arthur C. Brooks the other day. That's part of that. And so I started thinking like, oh, well, what can I do that would contribute to that effort? How could I be a part of that conversation? And so, literature is my thing. So that's where this course comes from.
Wonderful. Well, let's get into it. What kind of literary works about mid and later life did you consider for the course and why?
Yeah. So there are some works that I thought about that, for instance, Kathleen Rooney, wonderful Chicago writer, has a great little novel called Lillian Boxfish Takes a Walk, which is great. And I really recommend it. Thought about teaching it in this course, decided not to because she herself was not the age of the person she was writing about. And so I thought, I want these works to not just be about later life,
Right.
but to also be by authors who maybe themselves are writing them in part because they are grappling with some of this stuff and trying to figure it out for themselves.
Yeah.
So, and also around that same time, I was on vacation in Minneapolis. There's lots of wonderful bookstores in Minneapolis. And I came across this book by Russell Hoban, who some of you may know about Bread and Jam for Francis, Best Friends for
Yeah.
Francis, right? The Francis the Badger books. Well, it turns out that in addition to writing those that were illustrated by his wife Lillian, Russell Hoban had the same sort of dry wit and keen eye for human foibles in work that he wrote for adults. That there was a novel that he wrote called Turtle Diary that had been out of print, and the New York Review of Books brought it back into print. They have this special series of 20th century books that they felt should come back into print, and this was one of them, and just happened to see it on a table, and I thought, how fun is this? And I read it like almost all in one go, back in my hotel room in Minneapolis. It was laugh out loud funny, and just so clever and so interesting. And so you'll see that's one of the texts that we're reading. And the same thing with some of these other works. Some of them not works that when people think about them are necessarily works that people associate with thinking about, your second act or your third act in life. But they are. The film American Fiction, which is an adaptation of Percival Everett's Erasure, of course, is, about race and race relations in America, but also about, especially the film, which deals so much with his relationship with his family, is also about um, him coming into this later stage of life, and his mother coming into her later stage of life and his grappling with that. So, and I'll leave that there, no spoilers. But so these are some of the kinds of works that we're going to be looking at.
Well, that is fascinating, and I'm a huge fan of Bread and Jam with Francis, and I can just picture being in bed with my kids reading that, something they will no longer do with me. And
Yes.
so, the idea that this person could also be a guide for me in midlife is quite exciting. So I
Mhm.
look forward to looking that book up in particular. Well, let's kind of take a step into why. So those are the types of books. How do you think literature can change the way we think about aging? Like, how does this modality and fiction and poetry in particular offer perspective that might not be possible through the other guides, so to speak, that we might rely on?
Sure. Sure. And of course there's lots of great memoirs out there that people can look to, and that's also storytelling. But I decided to really focus on fiction and poetry in this course because I wanted this to be not just about sort of looking, and we'll talk about this more in the Grace Paley story. It's not so much like, oh, this person is a model for me, but sort of, this character is a model for me, and this is what I could or should do. But just sort of, it's a way for writers and readers to really explore what's at stake, um, right? Our own imperfections that I think we become more aware of as we age. We become more aware of the world's imperfections and how do we deal with them? Do we develop more patience for them or less patience for them, depending on what they are? And how do we grapple with that? So the fact that that fiction and poetry can be places to really experiment and explore makes them a good place for us to begin our look.
Fascinating. Well, so do you think the reading experience itself changes as we move through different phases of life? Because, there's two ways in which this may matter, right? One is the material, right? And so the
Hmm.
material here you're choosing to be related to this topic. But then there's the person that's in your classroom. And my guess is many people who may be attracted to this classroom may be themselves in mid or later life. How do you think that the reading experience changes as we move through different life phases and how these books may look differently when you're actually in this phase?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. And certainly the Grace Paley story that we're going to talk about in a bit is one that I've taught a lot. I've read a lot for many years. And the as I move through life, I acquire additional angles from which to view this story, right? When I was younger, I probably saw it more through the lens of gender and gender relations. And then as I get older, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, I have more experiences and more things that I've lived through, and I can relate to it in a different way. I mean, I just wrapped up this Tuesday night. I just wrapped up teaching my September term course, How to Eat a Poem, and in one of our class sessions, we were discussing Robert Duncan's poem, "My Mother Would Be a Falconess," and there were students in class. It's a poem I've known about for many years. I've always read it from the point of view of the speaker, the poem who's the child. It's a poem about a mother-child relationship, and I always read it thinking about, the relationship from the child's point of view. We had people in class who were mothers of adolescents or young adults, and they were identifying with the mother and they
Yeah.
were talking about it from that point of view, and it made me see the poem in a different way. So certainly our own life experiences inform how we read and what we see and what kind of questions we ask of a text as we read it. Certainly that's the case. Yeah.
So, I mean, one thing that is always very interesting to me is how people structure their classes. So we've gotten a sense of the text you'll read, how they can potentially have double meaning as, someone who's just interested in a great story and as someone who may be aging and looking for that fiction as a foil as they think about their own life. How do you structure the class in a way that allows you to explore these themes and that allows people to compare notes with one another?
Yeah. Well, I always try to pick texts that there may be some texts in class that people can personally relate to, and then there'll be some texts in class that they can't relate to personally.
Hmm.
And that's also important. For example, the Louise Erdrich novel, The Sentence, takes place during pandemic shutdown, and so people will have had different uh, experiences during that time that they'll be drawing upon. The main character spent some time in prison, which is an experience that some people in our class may have had, but a lot of them likely will not have had, right? And so to and that's the other wonderful thing about fiction is that it pushes us to empathize with people that we might not otherwise
Right.
encounter, and we might not be pushed to see things from their point of view. And so part of what we'll be doing in class, I like to think is, even though this is a class where, yes, we're bringing ourselves to the text as we always do when we read, but again, we're not looking to these texts to be parables to teach us, like, be like this person or don't be like this person, but to really look at, what's going on the page, what's going on with these characters, and to really be in conversation with each other about what we're seeing, what it's making us think about. Like I said, I'm always thinking, what kind of conversations do I want to have? So that's really what we spend a lot of time doing. It's a good old fashioned University of Chicago sitting down with the text and talking about it.
Well, and on that note, can we read one of the texts just to give
Sure,
everyone a glimpse in? I know you have a number that could be in this moment, but we talked about wants as a potential glimpse in text. So I'll let you, yeah, take it away.
sure. Sure. So to the folks out there in Zoom land, you'll see the story up on your screen. I'm going to read it. It's a short story, but it's a very short story. It won't take me long to get through. And as I'm reading, I want you to think about how does what these characters want? There's two main characters in the story. I want you to think about how what they want defines them.
Hmm.
So, I saw my ex-husband in the street. I was sitting on the steps of the new library. "Hello, my life," I said. We had once been married for 27 years, so I felt justified. He said, "What? What life? No life of mine." I said, "Okay." I don't argue when there's real disagreement. I got up and went into the library to see how much I owed them. The librarian said, $32 even, and you've owed it for 18 years. I didn't deny anything, because I don't understand how time passes. I've had those books. I've often thought of them. The library is only 2 blocks away. My ex-husband followed me to the book's return desk. He interrupted the librarian, who had more to tell. "In many ways," he said, as I look back, "I attribute the dissolution of our marriage to the fact that you never invited the Bertrams to dinner." "It's possible," I said. "But really, if you remember, first my father was sick that Friday, then the children were born, then I had those Tuesday night meetings, then the war began, then we didn't seem to know them anymore. But you're right, I should have had them to dinner." I gave the librarian a check for $32. Immediately she trusted me, put my past behind her, wiped the record clean, which is just what most other municipal and/or state bureaucracies will not do. I checked out the 2 Edith Wharton books I had just returned because I'd read them so long ago, and they are more apropos now than ever. There they were, The House of Mirth and The Children, which is about how life in the United States and New York changed in 27 years, 50 years ago. "A nice thing I do remember is breakfast," my ex-husband said. I was surprised. All we ever had was coffee. Then I remembered there was a hole in the back of the kitchen closet, which opened into the apartment next door. There, they always ate sugar-cured smoked bacon. It gave us a very grand feeling about breakfast, but we never got stuffed and sluggish. "That was when we were poor," I said. "When were we ever rich?" he asked. "Oh, as time went on, as our responsibilities increased, we didn't go in need. You took adequate financial care," I reminded him. "The children went to camp 4 weeks a year and in decent ponchos with sleeping bags and boots, just like everyone else. They looked very nice. Our place was warm in winter, and we had nice red pillows and things." "I wanted a sailboat," he said. "You didn't want anything." "Don't be bitter," I said. "It's never too late." "No," he said, with a great deal of bitterness. "I may get a sailboat. As a matter of fact, I have money down on an 18-foot two-rigger. I'm doing well this year and can look forward to better. But as for you, it's too late. You'll always want nothing." He had had a habit throughout the 27 years of making a narrow remark which, like a plumber's snake, could work its way through the ear, down the throat, halfway to my heart. He would then disappear, leaving me choking with equipment. What I mean is, I sat down on the library steps, and he went away. I looked through The House of Mirth, but lost interest. I felt extremely accused. Now, it's true, I'm short of requests and absolute requirements, but I do want something. I want, for instance, to be a different person. I want to be the woman who brings these 2 books back in 2 weeks. I want to be the effective citizen who changes the school system and addresses the Board of Estimate on the troubles of this dear urban center. I had promised my children to end the war before they grew up. I wanted to have been married forever to one person, my ex-husband or my present one. Either has enough character for a whole life, which, as it turns out, is really not such a long time. You couldn't exhaust either man's qualities or get under the rock of his reasons in just one short life. Just this morning I looked out the window to watch the street for a while and saw that the little sycamores the city had dreamily planted a couple of years before the kids were born had come that day to the prime of their lives. Well, I decided to bring those 2 books back to the library, which proves that when a person or an event comes along to jolt or praise me, I can take some appropriate action, although I am better known for my hospitable remarks.
What a fascinating read.
Thank you. So, as always with Grace Paley, very wise, very witty, little story, very voicey story, as we say in fiction writing, very driven by voice and character. But yeah, so I'm interested. I'm gonna open the chat now. And if folks could just start putting in the chat. What are some things that that you were thinking? What are you thinking about what these characters want and how those wants define them? And of course, we have the moment where he says, "I wanted a sailboat, you didn't want anything." And she insists, "Well, I do want things. I want to be a different person. I want to be the woman who brings these books back in 2 weeks." Yeah. And you can also raise a hand. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Marina. Husband wants material goods. She wants fulfillment. He's looking outward. She's looking inward. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. She wants relationships and respect. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. Yeah. And she wants to be respected for what it is that she wants too. Right. Um, Yes, yeah. So he seems let down by life while she seems satisfied with it, even though he feels he wants more things, right? Um, yeah. And yet she's satisfied with her life. Yeah. She wants to be more involved in her community, be more organized. And then Diane Katz asks, is wanting to be a different person particular to older persons or just a state of being, of having an examined life? Yeah. Yeah. For someone who wants nothing, says Denise, she sure seems satisfied with that. Yeah. Yeah. Um, which is true. Yeah. Um, and then there's the way this story ends, which is really, yeah, he has ambition and she has none, or at least the initiative to do more. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, the library book return. Yeah, yeah. I've had these books, the library's 2 blocks away. Why didn't I return them? I've had them for so many years. Yeah. Nothing for her is not really nothing. The librarian is more forgiving than her husband. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and that she's looking at turning in these 2 books as a monumental event. Like, look, see, I can change. I can be the sort of person who finally comes and brings these books back, right? Yeah, which is which is part of the humor of this story, right? Yeah, yeah. Did she think of all the little things in her life as monumental tasks? Yeah. Although, to say I had promised my children to end the war before they grew up, that's pretty monumental, right? So it's another thing to think about with this character is, okay, she wants to be involved, uh, you know, um, it's looking out at the little sycamores the city had dreamily planted. It's kind of interesting to think of the city dreamily doing anything, but that the city had dreamily planted a couple years before the kids were born had come that day to the prime of their lives. And then I said, well, I'm going to take those 2 books back to the library, that she's that sort of person. Right. So some people were saying she's very internally focused. She is in some ways, but she's also externally focused, whereas you might say her husband thinking, I want a boat, you know, that is that externally focused or is that actually really internally focused? Yeah. Um, will discussions always be conducted via chat? No.
Mhm.
No, we're just having to do that because of the way things are going on here. No, everyone will be on screen and we'll all be talking to each other. She made a ridiculous promise, like promising her kids she would end the war. Yeah, you could think of it as a ridiculous promise. You could also think of it as it might be an impossible thing to do, but what else could or should we promise our kids? What do we owe our kids? Do we owe them ponchos and boots and sleeping bags, or do we owe them, you know, dreamily planted sycamores and a war that ends before they grow up? Um, yeah, yeah. Husband was more concerned about having other people to dinner and a breakfast that didn't actually happen. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's another interesting little thing, right? The thing about the sugar cured bacon that, helped us give us a grand feeling about breakfast without feeling stuffed and sluggish. Right. So again, like someone wanting the physical thing and someone being satisfied with a feeling that we were in need. Please see second question
So
above.
what Diane mentioned in the second question is how much of your interpretive lens
Vitamins.
may be
Okay.
based on political, cultural factors versus psychological, emotional, which is a tough
Um,
thing probably to fully break out.
yeah,
What's your thought?
yeah. It is kind of hard to separate those out. I mean, we can say this is the first story in a collection that was published in 1974. Enormous changes at the last minute. Um, So we can think about it in some ways as being of its time, but it was also very striking to me as I was reading it just now, how fresh and current it still feels. How certainly I would like to promise to my children that the war will be over by the time they grow up. But in any case, yeah, I I don't. Yeah, I don't strictly separate those things. I mean, we're not going to most of the stuff that we're going to be talking about is contemporary literature. So, and contemporary American literature at that. So its context is our context. And so certainly that'll be coming into it. And certainly we'll be thinking about, or could be thinking about, um, we can be thinking about matters of class or gender in this story, amongst other things. Um, but we will certainly, as literature does, will be thinking about those things in terms of how they make themselves felt in human lives, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say, Stephanie, one thing that I think is really interesting as you are reading is this um, delta between who we think we may be and then
Mm-hmm.
who we become, and
Mm-hmm.
the process of reconciling. And there's a song I've always loved from Waitress, the musical, She Used to Be Mine,
Mm.
which Sarah Bareilles does
Yes.
a stunning vocalization of. And it's about Jenna, who's the main character, and she's at this moment where she
Mm-hmm.
feels stuck in an unhappy marriage and worn down by life. And the lyrics are kind of capturing this difference between this person she used to be, right? A version of herself that was very
Mm-hmm.
hopeful, and then where she is now, while also showing compassion and a hope that she can kind of return to strength and self-worth. And I always thought that was
Right.
a really powerful idea. And even the title is quite
Mm-hmm.
gripping. She used to be mine, right? This
Mm-hmm.
person used to be, and then somewhere in a time when I didn't even realize, like, I'm no longer that person. I know without that level of trauma associated, that's certainly true for me. If I think about like, aspirations or ideas, and then, you suddenly become someone else. And because you're so engaged in life, you often don't even notice until the delta is large enough for you to be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I think that's an interesting concept that I feel like is a thematic idea in wants as
Mm-hmm.
well, that is a
Yeah.
powerful part of this. And I'll maybe just say one more thing because I think it's so interesting. It relates to another grant program. We have a new cohort-based program that is starting this autumn called My Life Studio. And
Mm-hmm.
in that, it's all about the different characters you played over your life. How do you think about those and rely on wisdom from them as you navigate transitions? And in addition to a faculty member from Booth and another from another part of the university. We have Charlie Newell, who is the artistic
Mm,
director for 30 years of the Core Theater and just retired. And he's actually turning this into rehearsals where you're actually playing out different characters at different moments of your life,
wow.
thinking about it. So
Mm,
I think that idea of how, in some ways, this is a similar motif. You're just using literature to put yourself in different places, different moments, different
yeah.
challenges, and kind of using these characters to reconnect with your maybe earlier self and some of the transitions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, any
Yeah.
reaction to that idea of how
Yeah.
literature allows us to travel potentially even to our past selves and consider some of those transitions?
Sure. Yeah, yeah, and to future selves too. I mean, to go back to
Right.
the Sarah Bareilles song. I mean, what's interesting about that moment, and people who write musicals would refer to that as an I want song. So it's
Yeah.
particularly apt that you brought that song up here too, for that reason also. But what she wants, or she's coming to this crisis point because she's pregnant.
Yeah.
And
Like the key detail.
she's in, yeah, so there's this big life change that's going to be happening. And also there is this other person, right? It's sort of
Right.
like, do I want to be stuck where I am? But also, do I want, my child to be stuck where I am? Should I be bringing a child into this situation where I am in life? And so it's like looking back to you know, uh, this other person I was who's gone, but she used to be mine, as the song says. But also the point of the play is that she's doing that to try to look ahead to who could I be. So I
Yeah.
used to be this. I know I have those resources within me. Um, and I've come to, it's like Dante, right? It's another great, literary example of someone, coming to La Via Media, the road in the dark wood in the middle of my life. And I'm looking, ahead, and where am I going to go and what am I going to do? So yeah, so it's not just about going back. And that's what I was saying earlier about um books that are basically like books about early life with like a mid or later life frame, because the person's just looking back and nostalgic for what used to be, but looking back because you need to take a step ahead. That's different, you
Yeah.
know. And that's what I think that song is about. That, in some ways, is what I think this story is about. Although we can look at the last paragraph and ask ourselves, like, is she really going to change? It's like the fact that she brings the book back, she pays the fine that she's owed for 27 years, and then checks the books right back out again. Like, what is going on? Like, are our foibles always our foibles? And so therefore are our wants always our wants? And that's why I started with the question, how do what these characters want define them, right? As it's
Mm.
not just what they have achieved that has defined them, but what they want, that and may never actually get, but what they want or who they want to be, in some ways is really defining them. And it seems to me that, I could be wrong about this, but my sense is that's a kind of insight. And the fact that you could be kind of gentle and humorous with that instead of being cynical about it is a kind of insight into the human condition that I think only comes as you age. And you try and you fail and you realize that, when you were younger, you thought you were going to end the war before your kids grew up, and you were going to, grab the world and set it on its ear, and you realize, well, that looks like, that might not happen, or as she says in here, a lifetime isn't enough to get under the rock of somebody's reasons,
Yeah.
which is a great image, a great line. Um, so yeah, I mean, I feel like this is a story that, it's a midlife story for that reason too. Just the way that the care with which the writer treats these characters, right? That they're not simply figures of fun or satire, which might happen, I think, with a younger writer. You know, tell me in the chat if you think I'm wrong. But
Well, and let's talk a little bit about the reading list, Stephanie, because Beth asked that question. You put back in the readings. Are there one or two other stories that you want to snapshot in terms of the story and why you chose them for this class?
sure. So I already gave the shout out to the Russell Hoban Turtle Diary. Hey, I hope all 30 of you show up and join me in class. But if you don't, go find this book and read it. It's such fun. It's really wonderful and really delightful and sets up and subverts certain expectations in a lot of really fun ways too. So it was just a great little discovery in that bookstore, and I'm so happy to be able to share it with more readers. Um, you'll see there's more Grace Paley stories in here. Looking forward especially to discussing Dreamer in a Dead Language, which is a story of hers that I've loved that I haven't actually taught before. So looking forward to that. Edith Perlman. If anyone out there doesn't know about Edith Perlman, look her up. Wonderful writer who unfortunately we've lost, but she's fantastic. We'll be reading her story, Self-Reliance, which is great. Anything by her is fantastic. Um, there's Binocular Vision, which is what pulled her out of being a writer's writer and into greater prominence. But then also Honeydew, which was the last collection she was able to publish. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, I love all these things, or else I wouldn't have assigned them. But those are just some highlights. Yeah.
Well, so I know we're coming up to time. Let me ask you, we've talked a lot about the value of this type of literature to helping be a guide, a foil, a spark in our own reflection as we age. You have put together this syllabus. I imagine you've read these works several times now. Can I ask you, how has being in the literature of later life changed you? How has this shown up in your perception, behavior, way of thinking about the future? How has this practice changed your life?
Well, I can't promise you that having read these things now, I've cracked the code uh, on aging or anything else. But these texts and others like them have been nourishing to me as a reader. I just as I deal with I'm aging, my parents aging. I actually lost my mom just this past July.
Right.
Um, and being able to have wise and witty guides like Grace Paley and like Russell Hoban to think about, as I say, who we are, who we want to be, how we might never quite get to who we want to be, but even simply having that as kind of like a North Star is important, perhaps. Yeah. So they've helped me to think through some things. I don't have it figured out. I'm not like Arthur C. Brooks. I'm not going to become a life coach and write books telling people how to go about things, unfortunately. But but yeah, hopefully we can all talk together and learn together and try to gain some insight together.
Well, it sounds like you gained a lot of insight, and that it, more than anything else, gave you comfort to realize that the journey that you're on is one that is shared by everyone who lives in one sense or another. And there are some humanistic themes that run through it that just because of their shared nature give us, immediate sense that we're part of this uh, bigger journey. And we, I think, always benefit from realizing that the cycle of life is a universal one, and from kind of accepting and embracing it. And so my guess is literature may help people because it uncovers that shared and human experience. So Stephanie, thank you for teaching this at the Graham School. We are working very hard to become the intellectual home for the second half of life. Courses like this are just the opportunity to really dig into what makes us special, love of text, rigor, while continuing to add to the menu of opportunities for people who want to discern and reflect on what aging and this longer life world means for ourselves and for broader humanity. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you consider taking Stephanie's course this autumn and look forward to hearing about your journey ahead with her. Hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Steph, and thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks.